I have to say, you know, Madeline Hammond is going to be moderating, and she started moderating this 12 years ago, and there was only a handful of people in this audience, and she kept telling me, Roger, we should give this panel up. You know, people are not showing up, and I persevered, and I told her we have to stick to doing this panel, and look at this today. It's amazing. Thank you for proving me right, and Madeline, you'll be amazed. Christina Reed for Feast. Aneta Kopech, Joanna. Rory Kennedy, Last Days in Vietnam. Christine Hahn, Cake. Carolyn Blackwood, Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. Bonnie Arnold, How to Train Your Dragon 2. And Madeline Hammond, who's been running her own company for 10 years. Please welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to just turn this. Well, Roger is right. There were times where I was like, oh my gosh, why are we doing this? But I never doubted the power of women. Never, ever. Sadly, what I doubted was my own expertise. What I had said, the part Roger left out is I said, keep the panel, but get someone else. And isn't that interesting? So, yeah, so Roger, thank you for making me go through this. So I appreciate that. Okay, all right, we're going to have some fun today. I'm going to introduce everybody. We're going to talk about their films a little bit. We're going to go over some general questions and just see how it goes. I have a lot. I'm an overachiever. I got a lot of questions. Don't let them scare you. They're just big type on individual cards, so don't worry about that. All right, so we're going to start off. Let me put these in order based on where everybody's sitting. Okay, perfect. All right, I did it. Okay, start Bonnie Arnold, producer of How to Train Your Dragon Part 2. Everybody see that? I hope so. If not, please do. All right, let me zip through these because you are going to be amazed at who you have up here with me. Bonnie's co-president of DreamWorks Animation, where she oversees creative development and production for all theatrical releases. And that's a new job for Bonnie. So that deserves an applause right now. Okay, Dragon, nominated for Academy Award this year for Best Animated Feature Film, and she also won the Golden Globe. That's only part of it. Bonnie's also expanding the Dragon franchise with How to Train Your Dragon Part 3, which I believe has been announced, and she's also done other things that you may have seen, Over the Hedge, Tarzan, Toy Story. And Bonnie is very versatile. Bonnie also has an entirely other side where she loves independent film. So along with doing her animation, she was able, a few years ago, to also produce The Last Station, if you guys saw it, with Christopher Plummer and Helen Mirren. And that little teeny tiny film with not a very big budget got a couple Oscar nominations and a bunch of other stuff, so it's very good. And Bonnie's first job was as a unit publicist for American Playhouse Production. All right, now, Carolyn Blackwood. Carolyn, executive producer of The Hobbit. I should say The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. But after that, I'll just call it The Hobbit. Exactly. All right. It's easier. But she also executive produced the other Hobbits as well. And The Hobbit's nominated for Academy Award sound editing. Her day job, if you will, is Executive Vice President of Strategy and Operations at New Line Cinema. She's been doing that for 7 years. But Carolyn has worked her way up from not even the bottom. She worked her way all through New Line for the past 16 years, doing a production attorney, business affairs, film acquisition. She oversaw co-financing ventures and launched the indie arm called Picture House, which you guys may remember. And her first job in the industry was as a production attorney for MDP, or otherwise known as Mark Damon Productions, which was a small independent production and sales company. And during that first year, when she started out, she immediately went into acquisitions, international distribution, and independent film financing. Carolyn obviously likes to wear a lot of hats, and we're thrilled. So welcome. All right, so next up is Kristen Hahn, producer of Cake, which you may know. Remember if you guys were here last week. If you are not familiar with Cake, it stars Jennifer Aniston, and it is amazing, and we're going to talk a little more in depth about it. And Jennifer, in addition to being in Cake, is also Kristen's producing partner. Cake was nominated for 1 million awards this year, and Critic Choice Awards for Best Actress, a Golden Globes for Jennifer, a SAG Award, and on and on. Now, Kristen also wears a lot of hats. So she has a few day jobs. In addition to being a director, a writer, and a producer, she also runs Echo Films with Jen. And together they produce films, television, short films, and they go back. How many years do you guys go back?
We're getting older. I'd say 27.
Oh my God, 27 years. But you know, I bring that up because I've seen them together, and they are true partners in the best sense of the word. They're for each other, and all you hear about women and other women, no. You see, when it's a good producing team, you can see it work, and it certainly does with them. Before Echo, she also was one of the original founders of Plan B Entertainment, where she oversaw a bunch of films, including A Mighty Heart, The Departed, and many more. And separately, not knowing how you had time for this, you wrote a little book for HarperCollins. All right, and your first job, what was your first job?
An assistant to a writer on a show called Dear John.
I remember that.
That had one woman writer on the show. So things have changed.
Things have changed, thank God. And Rory Kennedy, you've seen things change. You are the director of this amazing documentary, Last Days in Vietnam, if you have not seen it. Rory was nominated for the National Board of Review. She actually won that. And you're up for Best Documentary Feature for the Academy Award, and even, I think next weekend, a Writers Guild Award. So you got a lot going on. Now your day job is, you have a few things, co-founder of Moxie Firecracker Films. How did you get that name?
Well, I had a company called Moxie. My partner had a company called Firecracker. You can fill in the gaps there.
Yeah, that's good. I was like, how do these two go together? They clearly don't. All right, I like it.
It's not just a firecracker. It's a Moxie.
It's a Moxie Firecracker. Okay, that's good. Well, clearly, as I'm sure all of you know, is that Rory has that Kennedy gene for public service. So her films cover poverty, politics, human affairs, human rights, many, many things like that. And in addition, if you haven't checked out Ethel, I guess you can get it on Netflix. It's amazing, and she won a ton of Emmys for that. So, all in all, I'm guessing, but based on what I read, you've produced over 25 documentaries. Could that be right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a lot for being so young. All right. And your first job, I believe, was as an intern. Is that right?
That's right.
And now, I think, where did you, we have Annetta Kopash with us. She's director and writer of the documentary short called Joanna. She is fantastic. Excuse me. And it was nominated for Best Documentary Short Subject this year, plus many, many, many awards from around the world. Annetta's co-job is she makes shorts and documentaries. She's traveled a lot through Poland and many, many other countries. And when I spoke to her on the phone for a few minutes, I was so amazed at her passion for this industry, because when you ask her what she does, she says, I'm working on Joanna. I go from festival to festival to festival. And that's amazing to do when you don't have a big budget. It shows true love for what you do. And I want to say you probably came the furthest, but where did you come from before Santa Barbara? Were you in LA?
From LA, yeah.
And then before that?
From Poland.
From Poland.
Yeah.
All right. Her first job in the industry was making small little independent films, homemade films, if you will. And then she was PR manager for, if you guys remember that great film called Get Low with Robert Duvall. Well, that film was funded by Polish money, and that's where Annetta worked on PR for that. And then last but not least, we have Christina Reed. She's producer of the animated short called Feast, co-producer of Big Hero 6, which I think many of you have seen. And both were nominated for Academy Awards this year. Her day job is, she's been the past 7 years as VP Production at Walt Disney Animation, Head of Development. And before Feast, she also produced a little animated short called Paperman, which won the Oscar a couple years ago. And before, that does deserve a little applause.
We forgot to roll the clips.
Okay, we'll do it right after. Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Oh, great. We're going to roll clips. I'm very excited. Then all this will make sense to you, so great. So just to finish up quickly, before Disney Animation, Christina worked at DreamWorks Animation, and she worked on Kung Fu Panda. And she started her career in visual effects and computer graphics at Rhythm and Hughes for 6 years, which is hard. There are not a lot of women in that field. And your very first job was as a production assistant. Okay, so now you know about the different films that they're on that have been nominated for many awards. We're going to take just a brief moment and look at some clips, and then we're going to get into some questions. Okay? Look at the screen. time we've shown clips this year. Oh, it's great.
Bring us all to tears.
I know, right? All of them. All right, we're actually going to start with you, Christina, since the last one we saw was Feast. Tell us a little bit about your inspiration for doing that short. Tell us how it came about.
After Paperman and Get a Horse, which were the last two shorts that Disney did, that kind of came about in a very spontaneous way, we decided to make a shorts program. And it was just, there was a lot of electricity and enthusiasm around working in a short format. Very typical at Disney, several hundred people get together, make a film. As Bonnie can attest, it's a giant endeavor. The stakes are really big, the budgets are big, there's massive pressure to go out and make something that the world will embrace. And when you take it into the short film world, it just gets a lot more fun and experimental, and you can try young leadership that's never led a department before, or play in new techniques, and both of those previous shorts had inspired that energy in the studio. And so we created something called the Shorts Program, and a fundamental piece of the Shorts Program is that anybody who's an employee of Disney Animation can come forward and pitch an idea. It doesn't matter if you're a PA, security guard, anyone who works for the company can come forward and pitch. And what I love about that as a notion is just the acknowledgement that every one of us has stories to tell. And it's all about who can tell it well.
Oh, that's great.
Out of 75 ideas, Patrick Osborne came up with one that turned into Feast, and we were off and running.
And what was Patrick's role?
He was the director. He's my co-nominee. He had been beta testing an app called 1 Second a Day. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it now.
Yeah.
You take 1 second a day of your life, and he had done a year's worth of just his dinners. And when he looked, at the end of 365 days, you have roughly a 6-minute film, and is literally, when I watch it with him, it's all just plates and plates and plates. And he can see when he watches it sort of what had been happening in his life. He can see where he and his fiancée were both in production crunch. He could see where they decided to get married. He could see where they had a couple special meals. And he started to wonder, is there a way to tell a broader story that an entire audience would understand just by watching meals go by? And dogs are creatures of habit, and they live by patterns. And it helped to amplify when the meals changed to have the dog reacting to it. So hence the Boston Terrier and food. It's a story about much more than dogs and food, but at its core, things we all love so much, dogs and food.
Oh, I love that. Although I was just thinking when you were talking, if I did a second from every dinner, I would know why I can't lose this 20 pounds. I'd be like, oh, right, I did eat that.
We all got fatter working on this.
Oh, my gosh.
Sure. There was a pizza
yeah.
shot going on for 4 months that we were testing with, and every night I'd come home and say to my husband, I need pepperoni pizza. He'd be like, what's happened to you?
Oh, God. So, there's no talking. So was that, of course, a deliberate decision, and did you try it both ways?
We played around with it. I think it's one of those private brass rings in animation. How much can you show and not tell? And so we just kept eliminating dialogue and pushing it further and further back into the mix, and feeling better and better about being able to just tell the story visually. And ultimately, we want our films to go out around the world, and it's much easier when there's no dialogue.
Yeah,
we're striving really to tell, to speak to universal themes. So an easy way to know if you're doing that is take out the dialogue and watch your movie.
But there's so much expression, so you almost realize, you don't even realize there's no dialogue because you're so into the story, so that's kind of cool. Now, I wanted to ask you just quickly about technology, because there's a lot of new technology that you used in this short, but were you always, is this your natural thing, or were you a gadget head, or is this like, oh my God, technology?
I'm not personally much of a gadget head. If you watch me struggle with my iPhone, it would become really clear. But I am very personally fascinated by the idea of making art move, and the projects where I have stepped out of an executive role and taken on a producing role, it's been very much motivated by doing something visually unique. So Kung Fu Panda years ago for DreamWorks, I felt that way. We were pushing the envelope. Paperman, Feast, even to a certain extent Big Hero 6. I love the idea that animation forces you to tell a story that's unusual. You have to do something that merits you telling the story in animation. And I love the idea of the technologists and the artists who come in and we figure out how are we going to execute this idea in a way that hasn't been done before. I find that personally really interesting.
So last question. So we're going to talk a little bit later about how you handle stress on the job, but I was reading something interesting. Did you actually bring in people's real dogs, Boston Terriers, and did it have an effect on the crew, a noticeable effect?
Yeah, it's amazing. We do a lot of research before we animate anything. We brought in, there were a couple employees who had Boston Terriers. We had a couple of dog days and puppy days where we'd get everyone together and just observe how they walked and how they moved. We wanted to make very much a dog that behaved like a dog. We didn't want a dog with a lot of anthropomorphic traits. But what was interesting is we'd look up during these dog days and there would be tons of people who weren't on our crew. And I kind of realized that just puppies, they relieve stress. In an ideal world, I'd bring puppies to the Academy Awards and just let them run up and down.
Man, that's an idea.
Kind of bring the vibe in the room down a little bit, you know?
I like that. I think that's a great idea. You should suggest that. That's good. All right, Annetta, let's talk about Joanna a little bit. So tell us how the idea first came about and how you got involved.
Sorry for my English, it's not perfect. I'm probably the only person here not speaking great English, so I hope you will understand me anyway. Well, it was a very strange way when I came up with the idea to make a movie about Joanna, because I was recently new mom and feeding my baby, still feeding my baby, so my world was really very narrow. Like, most of the time I stayed at home and took care of my daughter. And then I came across an article on internet about Joanna, and it was kind of interview with her, with the title "Cancer Something." So I just didn't want to read that. I didn't want to have these emotions. I just skip it.
Just because it was about cancer and...
Yes,
yeah,
yes. I just didn't want these emotions, to have these emotions, and I was feeling during this reading. But then I saw her face, it was her photo, and it was kind of, I don't know, magic, because I just returned, I went back, and I started to look at her face, her eyes, and it was something really amazing in that. So I just read the article. It was an interview with her, and I was like, oh my God, she's such a great girl, such a brave and such an intelligent girl, and in the same time with a very special and sarcastic sense of humor that I really loved. And then I learned that she was reading a blog, so I just started to read it. It was my first and the last blog I ever read. But it was so interesting, I mean, and so well done, so well written, because she was a great writer. And she was describing not her being sick, just her living. Like she described day by day her daily life with her son and her husband, in very small details, very small but very great moments, and I was so fascinated with that. Like, I wanted to meet her right away. I wanted to go to her place, because I imagined her kitchen. It should be covered with very, a lot of not necessary little things, and I just wanted to meet her so much, just even to meet her. But of course, the movie was in my mind already. So I mailed her and proposed the meeting. She said okay, but after for 2 months she never replied to any of my further emails. But because I was reading her blog, I knew exactly when she is going to be. So one day, so one day,
Is that persistence or, I don't know, something else?
one day when my life partner, who is also he and he's co-writer for Joanna, he came from work. So I said, okay, this is the baby, and I'm running to meet Joanna. So I went there and I just stood up in front of her and I said, okay, hello, I'm here. And she knew exactly who I was because she read my emails. And then I proposed a movie to her. I said, I have to make a movie about you because I've already done it on my head. And she said, no way. And then I learned that several Polish really famous filmmakers had already proposed the movie to her and she refused to all of them. So my chances were like 0% and I was so, sad about that, but I didn't give up. I said, okay, that's fine, but give me 1 minute, and in this 1 minute I will try to tell you how I see your story in the image, and if after 1 minute you say no, I will not bother you anymore, but please, the last one chance and only 1 minute. And it actually took me 1 minute, so I told her that I'm not interested in your dying, I'm not interested in your cancer. I'm really interested in you as a woman, as a very intelligent, smart, brilliant, beautiful woman. I'm interested in your relationship to your family and simply in your daily life, full of those little details that I really, really love. And it's going to be about that. I promise to you that it's going to be a beautiful image about beautiful moments, and that's it. And actually, she never said yes, but after, she didn't say no. So 2 days after, we've started.
I love that. Wow, that's a great story. I like it. And that's true, a non-answer is not a no. And a not a no could maybe be a yes. I don't know. And so your life partner's here today?
Yeah.
Where does he point him out? Let's clap for him because that was pretty good. What a partnership. Yay. Because it takes a village, you know that, so, and especially with a young child. So how long did it take you to write it?
The whole shooting, you mean? Yeah, we've started in April 2012. We finished in August 2012. And unfortunately, 2 months after we finished, Joanna passed away.
Gosh. And then just tell us quickly about the financing. Was it difficult to get this paid for, and
Oh, yes.
how did that work?
Oh, yes. It was like a hell because because I've started, right away, because 2 days after we've started. So I knew one address because I've just finished the film school. So I gave a birth to my daughter, and 6 months after I've decided to make a movie about Joanna. So my film school was the only address that I knew at that time, that I knew exactly when I went there, people will never say me no because they know me already, they trust me, I trust them. So I just went there and I tried to appoint my teachers, and I presented to them 1 day of shooting, and I was, full of passion, full of good energy. I was like, this is the best thing ever. So I showed to them and I asked, what do you think? Can I make a movie about that? And they said, they answered, come on, Aneta, you are doing it now. We can't stop you. Of course, please, go ahead. So we've started like this. So they gave me a little bit of money for the start. So it was really difficult because at the same time I was shooting the very intimate picture. without knowing Joanna before, so without any trust, any relationship, and at the same time I was organizing money and crew and so on. And actually, I was happy to have great people in my movie because I don't know if you know Ida, but cinematographer for Ida, Luca Jal, who is also nominated for Oscar, he was my cinematographer here.
Wow.
Yeah, but Joanna was first.
Oh, good.
And then,
But that's great to have.
yeah, and I also was lucky to have John A.P. Kaczmarek, actually the Oscar winner for Finding Neverland for music score. So, the crew was so great for nothing. I mean, zero money almost. So at the same time of shooting, I tried to collect more money. So I found sponsor, I found co-producer, and we also used crowdfunding in the end for post-production. But it was also very funny because the crowdfunding website, they has just started, and it was December, and everybody told us, you know what, in December people buy presents, not the culture. So you have no chance to, to gather any money. But we did it within 3 weeks.
Wow.
So people also helped us at the end. It's still not the budget even, but we did it, somehow we did it. So most of money we put to technology, just to have it really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, people who were working for this project were like pro bono.
Wow. Well, because it's hard to turn you down. Don't you agree? I would not be able to turn you down. So I think that's great. But I truly believe, all kidding aside, some things are just meant to be. And I think this is one of those things.
Thank you.
So that's great. Oh. So Rory, I want to talk to you for a second about, and I want to take you back to the first time you saw this screened and the incredible reaction you got. How did that feel? And was it just, did you just know? Did you know when you were doing it that this was something as special as it was?
Well, the film premiered at Sundance last year, and it was really an extraordinary screening and one that I'll never forget. And, as I'm sure everybody in this room and on this panel knows, you're kind of used to watching these films on these little monitors, and you kind of lose perspective, and by the end you kind of hope and think that you've made a good film, but you don't really know how people are going to respond. So I'm always totally anxious when I first show the film. So it was Sundance, and we were showing it to a theater of about 800 people, and it was sold out and the whole thing. And about 12 of the military folks who we profiled in the film, both the Vietnamese and the Americans who played a significant role during what our film is really focused on is the last 24 hours of the war and what happens. And so many of them had come to Sundance, and it was the first time they had seen it. Oh. And they were in the audience, so that made it all the more nerve-wracking. And then at the end of the film, there was a standing ovation, and clearly the audience responded, but I still didn't know how the people profiled responded. And so, I invited them all up to do the Q&A with me, and they all had tears in their eyes. And, you had just seen these guys, and it's all guys, it's 100% guys, which I was a women's studies major, and I always focus on women, but this is all guys. And so they all came up, and they all had tears in their eyes. But there was this amazing moment, and our story really focuses ultimately on these it's the last 24 hours of the war, and America had really not anticipated that it was going to fall so quickly, so we didn't really have a great plan in place. But basically, there were about 7,000 Americans, 6,000 Americans in country at the time. There had been a peace treaty 2 years prior, and so the United States government basically said, we just need to get those Americans out and leave everybody else behind. And so these people, the Americans and South Vietnamese on the ground, went against U.S. policy, risking their jobs and arguably their lives to try to get as many South Vietnamese out as possible. So that's kind of the story that we end up focusing on, is these real moments of heroism. So there was one of the people who we profile in the film is this guy, Stu Harrington, who started these black ops, and he's very heroic, but he is in a situation where he's at the embassy and he's getting people, and they're filling the helicopters with as many Vietnamese as possible and not putting as many Americans on because they know that's going to end the airlift. So they're filling them with Vietnamese, and there are about 400 at this hour. It's like 3:45 in the morning. There are about 420 Vietnamese who are still in the embassy, right? And so then the ambassador leaves and they shut down the airlift, and they said there are no more helicopters. And this is after they have assured everybody in the embassy that they're going to get out. So Stu Harrington is told that he has to tell the 420 that they're going to get out when he knows that he's on the next helicopter and there are going to be no more helicopters. But he speaks Vietnamese. So he speaks to these 420 and he says, "You're all going to get out, rest assured, you're in America now." And then he says he's going to go to the bathroom, and he goes to the top of the embassy and he leaves. And it's this horrendous moment, and and he's so poetic about it, and how this moment which has captured the entire American policy in a nutshell, how wrong it was, and this sense of abandonment. And then he felt guilt about this moment for the rest of his life, and he lived in fear, and he would have nightmares of running into one of the 420. So we then, ended up profiling and finding one of the 420 who's in the film, who happened to also be at Sundance. So he came up on stage and he talked about how he lived in fear of running into one of these 420 his whole life. And, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience because you felt so, so much, and it shouldn't be on his shoulders, and he didn't do anything wrong. And, you feel this. And so he's talking about it, and then the Vietnamese, Binh Pho, who had been left behind, took the microphone and he said, "I want you to know, Stu, that I forgive you." And he told this story about how he had this girlfriend and he didn't, it was going to be a disaster, and then he, ended up spending 5 years in prison and getting on a boat and getting out, and then he, found the woman of his life. It never would have happened had Stu gotten him out. But in any case, it was...
Oh my God, thank God.
I know, it was this really beautiful moment where, it was where he...
Rory, that could have gone all wrong.
I know, and I had this very nice conversation because, when you're trying, one of the things that happens, it's such an honor to be nominated for an Oscar, but then you have to try to get tickets for everybody to go to the Oscar, which is complete disaster, and it's like you're, bribing everybody to try to get these tickets. But in any case, I was, so I was very discouraging of everybody on our team that they're going to actually be able to attend, but we got the good news that we got, most of the tickets that we wanted, which was fantastic. So yesterday, I called both Stu Harrington and Binh Pho to tell them that they could come to the Oscars.
Oh,
and
wow.
they were, and I asked, I said, "What are you doing on February 22nd, and do you want to be my date?" And so it was very sweet, and they both were so excited. And then when I was talking to the Vietnamese, Binh Pho, he said, who would have known 40 years ago we were all at that embassy, and I was abandoned, and I was sitting there, and now 40 years later, we're, me and the guy who left me there are going to the Oscars together.
Wow.
So it was very sweet.
That's amazing. You really don't know how things are going to go, That who could ever?
Love life.
You couldn't even write that as a, But speaking of writing. The thing that I find so interesting is, and you were talking about this, is the importance of being a storyteller. And I think to your core, that's a major thing, because when you watch this, you really don't even think it's a documentary. You're just captivated by the story.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. My husband, Mark Bailey, helped me make this film, and he is a screenwriter. So I think he was actually just nominated for a Writers Guild Award for this, which is great to recognize writing in a documentary that has no narration, because I think it's a little bit more nuanced. But I think that, and I had a fantastic editor. So, that's really, when I read this story, and it was a story, I thought, well, I know this story, and then I read about it, and I was like, I didn't know this story. It's unbelievable, and it was so inherently dramatic. Of all the documentaries that I've made, I've never had a story come to me that had kind of the elements of drama and character. I mean, the ambassador, you know, there are these kind of Shakespearean characters and themes that come up in this film. And so, you know, I really wanted to capture that and have it feel, you know, and transport audiences to Saigons 40 years ago and really feel like what's going to happen next. And, you know, that's always a challenge. But we didn't use a narrator. We didn't use any historian. So it's all people who are firsthand accounts telling it as it happens.
Right.
And so I think it does make you feel, well, what's going to happen next? Who's going to get out? Who's going to be left behind? And this sense of tension that I think we were able to accomplish.
So last question for you. So you come from, of course, the most fantastic lineage, and a lot of your documentaries are about serious topics. Did you ever think, you know, like Crazy at Night thought, like, I'm just going to do a romantic comedy. I'm going to go against type. I'm going to totally be rebellious. I'm going to do the stupidest thing ever.
Well,
those thoughts ever occur to you?
My brother, Chris, says that I make two types of films, depressing and really depressing. That's pretty. I take issue with that because I find them very inspiring and hopeful. But I understand that the topics are a little depressing. I would be really happy to do a comedy. I appreciate funny, and so I'm open to that. But I haven't quite found the right subject.
And speaking of that, it's funny because when you hear people talk about Rory, they're like, she has the most amazing sense of humor. And I'm like, I know, but you wouldn't know that necessarily.
I know.
So, all right, so Kristen, so let's talk about, now speaking of senses of humor, Kristen, talk to us about Cake. It deals obviously with chronic pain. And I feel like in a way you sort of made chronic pain a topic that hadn't really been discussed before. So tell us a little bit about how you got involved with that project.
Well, when Jennifer and I talked about starting a production company a long time ago, we wanted to kind of take advantage of the fact that she was at a particular place in her career where people were, you know, willing to take meetings with her and therefore me. And so we would, you know, the dream was to try and find material that had sort of, was entertaining but had a purpose, had something to say about the way we live. And I just have to say, I'm so, like, moved to tears. I'm so, like, incredibly moved by these three women. Because I do think that filmmaking, for me, the reason why I got into it is because I believe in the power of filmmaking. I believe in storytelling being a way not only to better understand ourselves and each other, but to heal, literally. And in Hollywood, we like to joke, there's this saying that, you know, we're not curing cancer. And I have come to tell people who say that, speak for yourselves. Because
good for you.
I think that there is curative power in filmmaking. And so Jen and I wanted to, you know, try and basically use her power for good and use my passion for good and skills that we acquired over the years. And that was really the impetus for starting Plan B and ultimately then the spin-off of Echo. When, anyway, there was some headlines involved in that spin-off, but, and honestly, Cake was the culmination of a dream that we had in our early 20s.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I mean, we dreamed of working together and doing something that mattered. And so Cake became kind of I would say 10 years of planting seeds until, frankly, you know, the stars aligned and Jen was ready to really take that leap. And apparently financiers were ready to finance that movie. That's not an easy film to get made, and chronic pain is something that, you know, is not is about as depressing apparently as the topics you choose. So we can compete. We're competing for very depressing films category. The winner is we tie. But we did try. The beauty of Jen Aniston is she can't help but be funny, even with the depth that she brings to a true characterization of someone that I found to be, and many people who've seen the film have found to be so authentic and so integrous, you know, toward what it really is like to live with pain every waking moment. And was very moving, experiencing audience members who live with pain coming to the screenings and saying that it took every ounce of energy they had to get to the theater, and they had never seen themselves on screen before. And that's obviously a powerful thing to be able to do,
It
is
really is.
tell that
Yeah, no question.
story. A lot of vets, a lot of Vietnam vets actually came to see the film, and so that's powerful. That's an honor to get to tell people's story that has, they feel has been left out of the record books. But our desire is to kind of combine entertainment with, like I said, purpose, meaning, something reflective of something going on in our culture. And so the film also deals, again, in a sort of darkly comedic way, with also addiction. It deals with, getting
Loss.
over very emotional, loss and traumatic trauma, PTSD type situations, and really making a decision to start again.
Wouldn't you love to have been in that pitch meeting where she says, so Jennifer Aniston's going to gain weight, we're going to put a scar on her face, she's not going to wear any makeup, and it's about chronic pain.
Our financier said, sign me up.
Sign me up. How great is that?
Yeah, apparently they needed a film like this, our
Yeah.
financier, so we were the perfect match. We needed them and they needed us at that particular moment, so we were very, very lucky.
And whoever would have thought, too, that this little tiny, teeny film, which, and look at it now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, it's been a great reception for the film and for Jennifer, but again, I think, her willingness to totally take that leap, like blindfolded off a cliff.
Right.
Trusting that you'll land in water deep enough to not kill you, was rewarded by audiences who really, they got it, they saw it.
And you had a great reception in Toronto. That was the first time that had been screened?
Did talk about emotionally gratifying. Yeah, that was, because Jennifer and I have been friends for so long, we're like sisters, and so to see her have the bravery to do that and then have this big
Get
audience give this standing ovation for her as not just a comedian, but as a true, artist that she is, that I know her to be, but everyone else got to experience it in a different way. It was emotional. It was
Well, I
great.
also think this role has changed a lot of perceptions about her because they look at her now in a different way. And I credit you also because now Jen has been doing a lot of producing. And so that partnership that you two have, which is so strong, has enabled her to even go further in her career than just being an actress.
Yeah. She said to me recently, I get it now. I didn't quite get it 10 years ago, what it meant to sort of take your destiny into your own hands and not just be an actor who goes up for roles and get to ask someone for permission to get
Yeah.
hired.
And then last question is, I think one of the coolest things about Cake, and if you haven't seen it, it's Jennifer Aniston has an amazing relationship with her housekeeper, who is played by this incomparable actress named Adriana Barraza. Am I pronouncing it right?
Barraza.
Barraza. And it's such a great, because really this housekeeper is the only one that can put up with her because she's just such a kind of going through such a bad time. And I think it's that relationship, which to me is the best part. Was that something that was intentional, and is that something that you guys really strive to incorporate?
Because we have amazing women in our lives, so we're very lucky, Jennifer and I. We have an incredible female support group and group of friends, and we take it pretty seriously. It's kind of our religion. And so, the notion of finding material that really reflects beautiful relationships between women is definitely something we gravitate toward. So, and that in particular was a relationship that was not the expected, and telling a story about friendship being found in the most unlikely places and ways is, there's something extra beautiful about that kind of friendship.
Yeah, that's great. And Carolyn, talk to us a little bit about Hobbit, because you also put a strong female character in there, which I would bet was intentional.
Oh, yeah, Toriel, yes. Yeah, she was the sort of embodiment of a lot of discussion at the start of the development process on Hobbit, where we, there's a lot of men in the Hobbits, a lot of hairy, small men. Sweaty, hairy, small men. And in an attempt to really sort of, bring in our female audience, I mean, the Hobbit book, in its purest form, doesn't have Galadriel and some of the other strong female characters that you saw through the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Right.
So we did sort of incorporate her in, you saw the clip that we played earlier, but it really did feel like you needed to have, a female energy and something that would sort of, not only just bring in the female audience, but would sort of, be
Yeah.
more representational of, what we felt to be, the sort of whole Middle-earth experience of, and what the fans had come to sort of expect and look for. So, in that development process, this, the idea of Toriel was born, and what she would be like and what she would embody, and, the strong female warrior. She's not just, a pretty face that sort of acts as a love interest in the movie. She really is someone who, she kicks a lot of ass.
Right.
And it was very, very intentional. So it was that was a big, very strongly sort of orchestrated thing on the part of all the filmmakers. It was, it wasn't just Philippa Boyens and Fran Walsh and myself, as the women in the group saying, hey,
Hey,
let's
let's
get
do
this
it.
done.
Right.
Peter Jackson as well, and at the time when Guillermo del Toro had been involved, he, supported it too. So it was yes, it was very
But you made it
intentional.
so it was organic, and it didn't look like tokenism in any way, or you threw it in there. It was
Yeah,
so
no.
natural.
There was a real purpose for it, and I thought Evangeline Lilly did a beautiful job with it. She,
Yeah.
once we cast her, and that's one of the other great things about working in these collaborations and making these films. You write things on a page, but then when you actually cast the actor in it, there's this big collaboration that happens and things change and morph, and that what that actor wants to bring to that character gets put on the table as well, and then you just sort of see it all come to life, which is really fantastic. She did a great job.
So now, you wore a lot of hats on this production of the film, and part of that was instrumental, the relationship that your studio had with New Zealand.
Oh, yes.
So I imagine there were quite a lot of trips
Yeah.
and dealing with their
I spent a lot of
government.
time in New Zealand.
Did you?
Yeah.
So I want to hear a little bit about how that was, and also for many of us that travel, but you did a lot of travel. I want to know, do you have a secret about that, and what did you do? Are you the most well-read person in this room?
Can I tell you, I binge watch a lot of great, sort of television on those Air New Zealand flights, like True Detective.
Yeah.
I became obsessed.
The best. It's great.
And, but for those, 15-hour flights, I don't think I would have watched a lot of the great sort of, films and television I would have missed. So, because, you're working all the time and you're trying to sort of, you've got your family life, you've got your work life, you've got your projects that you're working on. And so the idea of having that sort of, being in your pod and being able to just sort of, have that time. So I always tried to make the most of that, whether it was usually not even reading scripts, it was usually watching programming, independent films, documentaries, and like I said, I found myself binge watching, a lot of the great cable series that are on there, on today too. So that was a lot of fun. The New Zealand stuff, though, in particular, I'm listening to everybody on the panel talk about how difficult it is to make a film, and it always strikes me whenever I have these conversations with people that it's amazing that any film ever gets made. It really is. They're all these sort of happy little miracles, because it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's financing, and it's really difficult in the independent film world, which was where my roots were before I worked in the studio world. Financing is always a big deal. But even at a big studio, where the financing isn't really the issue, there's a million other problems and hurdles and difficulties in bringing any one particular film to the screen and, to fruition. I mean, we didn't have a money issue per se on trying to get The Hobbit off the ground.
Right.
But it was every other problem under the sun that you could imagine, from really highly complicated rights situations, where this intellectual property goes back into, deals that happened in the 50s and 60s, and trying to sort of figure out who owns what and how this works and how to untangle it all, and then then there's issues with, okay, now we're going to bring the creative team together and figure out how we're going to do this now if we've unraveled this part, and it was, hurdles with, okay, how do we film in New Zealand? Currency issues, labor issues, how are we going to make all that happen? Losing Guillermo as the filmmaker, convincing Peter to come back into Middle Earth and say, no, really, come back.
Like now.
Like now.
Like now.
He was on as a producer, but he had no intention, in taking back the director's chair. So that was a fun conversation.
I bet. I hope there was wine and a lot of food involved in that.
There was a lot of wine and a lot of food involved in that conversation. And, you do sort of have to recognize that, when you're talking to somebody about where they'd already spent 10 years of their life, working in this area and thought that they had sort of been done with it forever, and trying to somehow get them to a place of feeling like, but this is your legacy, this is your baby, no one's going to be able to do this as well as you. And having him spark back to that and come back around and get back into that chair, that was a big, big hurdle.
And I bet his wife and partner was very instrumental in that, too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if Fran Walsh didn't want him to do it, he wouldn't have done it.
That's
I
right.
mean, she's
the force.
She's the force. I mean, she's the big unsung hero behind me. She's very, very press shy. You're not going to see interviews with her.
Right.
You'd never see her do a panel, and all the press that they've done. You might get a couple of shots of her if you sort of Google it on a red carpet for the Academy Awards on, Return of the King, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
She's very, very private and protective of all of that, and that's their partnership. That's how it works for them. But yeah, she was very instrumental in that. If she didn't want him to do it, he wasn't going to do it.
And also, you had to also deal with all those crazy Hobbit fanatics. There's probably quite a lot of those who all had expectations.
Yeah. I mean, that weighs heavily. It weighs heavily on all of us when you're making those films,
Yeah.
because there
It's a
are
responsibility.
It's a big responsibility. And then there's also the rewarding part of that too, because you hear these responses from these fans who talk about how much this meant to them, whether it is, from when they were sort of, showing it to their children and sort of re-experiencing it when we sort of, rebooted this franchise again with Hobbit, and how much it's meant to them as a family, and they watched it together, and these were books that they grew up on that now they're sort of giving to their children, and how meaningful it is. I mean, it's a lot of why we do what we do, to entertain people. And the idea that it sort of elevates itself beyond sort of just pure entertainment to something that has real meaning to these people and their families, it's really rewarding.
Like they own it. They feel like they're part owner.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
So last question for you. So, at the beginning I was saying all the hats that Carolyn wore at New Line, and she works at I think a great place where it lets you wear a lot of hats, and it gives you the freedom. A lot of people change jobs, but in Carolyn's case, the job changed around her.
That's right.
And my question is, because I know you do a lot of things, is it a rush you get? Is it an adrenaline thing? Or is it the way you stay engaged and intellectually curious? Because it's unusual that you don't do the same thing for a lot of years. You do like 5 things.
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, everyone's different and everybody's path is different. If I had worked at a place where things were so compartmentalized, I wouldn't have stayed there. So whether it's an adrenaline thing for me, or whether it's just sort of how I'm built, I need to constantly be challenged and engaged and feel like I'm part of this bigger process. For, like, when I think back to growing up and, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I didn't really exactly know. I did end up sort of, doing what I think a lot of people do after college. I sort of said, okay, I'm going to postpone the inevitable and I'll go to some form of graduate school, which is how I ended up in law school. Although I knew very, very quickly I did not want to be a lawyer.
Right. But I bet it has come in handy.
Well, sure,
in
it
all
comes
these
in handy.
negotiations.
The same way, like,
Yeah.
had I gotten an MBA, that would have come in handy for me as well,
Right.
But it was, for me, what I realized and recognized I always liked to be a part of is a team creating something, be it, when I was in high school and college, working on the yearbook, whatever it might have been, I liked the idea of being part of a team that created something that sort of, you felt some sense of accomplishment at the end of that. So working in the film business, I want to feel like my hands are in all these different aspects of it, which ultimately is producing, and that's where it has come full circle for me when I started really working on the Hobbits over 5 years. Because just doing one small thing
Yeah, I wouldn't do it.
didn't do it for me. And I was lucky enough to work at a company that let me do that, where it's my biggest piece of advice I give to people who come and speak to me, like young women who say, what's my path? How do I get to wherever the place is that they might think they want to go to? And I said, my big recommendation is if you can start working at a small company as opposed to a big company,
Right.
it's a great way to start, because you get a lot of exposure to a lot of things. And chances are, if you're industrious, if you're smart, and if you're willing to, just work really, really hard, you're going to find places that they need you. And you step right in and you fill that role, and you impress the people around you, and you're going to expand your purview a lot more. It's a
Yeah.
great way to sort of get a real sense of who you are and what you want to do.
Well, and you're also exposed to a lot of different, you can see people doing a job and be like, oh, I like that. Because
That's
when
right.
you come out of school, you really don't know. You know, you're like, well, I think I want to get into marketing, or I think I want to do production. When people say this to me, I'm like, do you know what production is? Not really, but, you know, it sounds good.
But it's like dating, isn't it? I mean,
It is.
half of the thing is about finding out the things you don't like about
Right.
it.
Yeah.
You know?
And trying to avoid those instead of
And
being
then you
attracted to
avoid them.
Right, that would be good, okay.
Theoretically, you avoid them.
Theoretically.
That's your best advice, actually.
That's right.
Don't marry them.
Well, so, yeah, try not to marry him, or stay with him. So, now, Miss Bonnie. So, you know, we clapped at the beginning because Bonnie now has this big title, and it is a big title. And you were busy before in your producing role, and now you've taken on a whole other thing. So, I just want to know, is it different? I mean, you and your business co-person, Maria,
Right.
are running the organization. And so, how's it different for you?
I've
You're the
only been
boss.
doing it for a few weeks, but
Did you change your office? Did you do anything?
I now have two offices. I have a Dragon 3 office, and I have a co-president of feature animation office. So.
Wow.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I've never been an executive before, honestly.
Yeah.
I've only been in production and, you know, and then segued and, you know, went up the chain to producing. But the way I look at it is there's some, you know, there's some amazing film makers at DreamWorks, and there's some amazing film projects. And I feel like my job there is to support them and help them make the best version of their movies, which is, I feel like that's what I do well.
Right.
And so I find that exciting. I've been in sort of the world of How to Train Your Dragon since about 2006. So it's a long time. And I've worked with a lot of our same creative team, which I adore them
Yeah.
and think they're amazing. And I wouldn't be committing to doing Dragon 3 almost, you know, on top of all this if it wasn't for the fact that I had such a great team. But it's exciting to actually see what some of the other filmmakers are really doing, other than just maybe watching their films or having conversations with them in the lunchroom.
Right.
I mean, I can actually sit in the room and watch some of the animatics and be in story meetings and see what they're doing and have an opinion about it, or try to make sure they're going down the right path and provide them the kind of support they need. So I'm challenged by it. It's a bit daunting. I'd be foolish
Yeah.
to say it isn't, but you know, we have a lot of hope that it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to have great product.
I think it's great, and the main thing is you understand their needs and you understand their problems, and so when they come to you, you've been there, and that's always hard when you're the boss and you really have no, you know, I had a boss once that was like, well, this will only take you 5 minutes, and I'm like, nothing takes 5 minutes, are you kidding me, right?
Right.
So you really do, you get it, and that's really important,
Well, I
and they
hope so.
understand.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think
hope
it's
so.
good. So let me ask you also, when you, let's talk about Dragon for a second. So when there's the marketing and the whole thing, because you know more about that and that franchise than anyone, do you get involved? Do they come to you? And is this going to be kind of that synergy that you're going to help create more of?
Well, they do, and I think it's always a challenge because sometimes, you know, the filmmakers and the marketing team have different ideas about how they're going to sell the movie. And I think, just relating back to what Carolyn was saying, even though How to Train Your Dragon wasn't a book in the way that The Hobbit was, it was still based on a very popular book series.
Sure, right.
The first movie did really well around the world. It was very popular. And we had a big following, and you have a lot of pressure from your fans and people
Yeah.
who have expectations for what the movie will be. And we get a lot of feedback from that. I know we were talking a little bit about social media and stuff, and we know what people are thinking and what
Yeah.
they're looking for.
Instantaneously.
So
know.
you definitely have to collaborate. Sometimes you have different ideas, and you know, the filmmakers, again, they know the movie. So I think it's a little bit of give and take. There's some frustrations about it, but there's some things that are really rewarding about it when it all kind of comes together, and our ideas for who the characters are mingles with what their ideas of how to let people know about it.
Yeah.
So-
So I want to talk to you for a second, too, about Dean. So Christina was talking about your relationship with your director on Feast, and you had a very good relationship and a strong relationship with Dean, your partner on Dragon.
Right.
Do you guys have a shorthand? Do you just get it? Who wins the fights? How do you keep yourself?
Well, this is Dean Deblois, and he is the writer-director of How to Train Your Dragon 2, and will be for Part 3 as well. And he was a co-writer and director on the first film with
Right.
Chris Sanders. And Dean is amazing. I mean, he is the real deal. And I enjoy, I mean, the other women were talking about what they enjoy about it, but I really, really, really I love movies, but I love working with the artists.
Yeah.
And I love working with, all along the way, and Dean, in particular. And there is sort of a shorthand. I think I so appreciate him, allowing me to be such a close partner with him, but in a way that doesn't. Dean is a little bit of a one-man band sometimes, but
Right.
I think he always says, Bonnie, I know your notes come from passion. So, and so I think we should think about, maybe, doing a second film. And Dean said, let me think about that. And it's based on a series of about 12 children's books, although, or, young adult, or whatever you want to call them, book series. But it's pretty much of a departure from the book series in the way that it's true to the characters, but again, a departure in the storytelling. And Dean came back and said, I'm only going to do it if I'm going to do it in the first film would be the first act of this story of Hiccup and Toothless, who are the main character, the Viking boy and his dragon. And he said, I have an idea of what would be the second film is going to be the second act, and I have an idea for the third film. So he pitched this outline of what would be the second film and the third film.
Yeah, smart.
And Jeffrey Katzenberg said to us, he said, only if you make sure that the second film is completely gratifying in and of itself as a film.
Right.
And Dean said, we sort of solved all the problems of Hiccup in his first film, and he has no problem. And what a good movie has to have somebody with an issue. The protagonist has to have something he's got to figure out. And
That's right.
his first pitch was, what if Hiccup was 5 years older, and what if he found, was out, kind of exploring the world on Toothless, and he came across this sort of person who knew everything about dragons, and that person ended up being his mother. And
Oh, my gosh.
we all said, oh, we're in. And it was
Yeah.
so great.
How do you not say yes to that one?
Yeah, I mean, it was, again, it sounded sort of slightly Shakespearean, actually, and kind of
Right.
interesting, and how the father would play into this. And anyway, it just seemed like, it's all about, good storytelling, and I give Dean a huge amount of credit for, staying the course and making the film that he wrote a film that, write what you know, they say,
Right.
wrote the film that he really wanted to make, and to DreamWorks for supporting it. It was a little bit risky in terms of
Yeah.
some of the things that we did in the film.
Well, and for you, for keeping that franchise on track and fresh and great and fantastic, And also credit to you for your strong female character, Merida. She, and doesn't
What do you
even...
mean, Astrid?
I mean, Astrid.
Astrid,
And you
yeah.
don't even, it was so great. She kicked ass.
Well, in the books, there were no, believe it or not, the books were written by a woman, but there were no women in Hiccup's little band of kids.
Ah.
And the first thing I said is, where's the girls?
Yeah.
So, they're only 50% or more of the population, but...
Oh, right.
But, and again, not to say whatever, but I mean, there's, Hiccup's mother is played by Kate Blanchett, and Astrid, who's Hiccup's, girlfriend and cohort, and, voiced by America Ferrara. And I mean, it's all important to us. I think it's so important for, these, not only women, but young girls to have role models or, people they aspire to be and can be like. And I think it's always funny, I have to say aside, that there are girls that we get letters from, young girls who actually want to be Hiccup, which I think is pretty amazing.
That's pretty good.
But the point of it is that it's great to have an idea about a female character,
Right.
but I give a lot of credit to Dean in that he writes for the character. He actually created the character
I know, but you said,
in
where's
the dialogue.
You said, where's the girl?
I did. But again, I think he wrote to that
That's
and all the, what we brought to it to bring some of these, women into the scene, because I think, again, even at every age, it's like I say, you can't take away from, boys and girls need to see women doing strong things.
Right. Because if you don't see it, you can't even imagine yourself doing it.
Yeah.
So you're right.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think Gina Davis, who is a colleague of mine and
Gina.
an advocate for actress, obviously, and a colleague of mine, she says, if you can see it, you can be it.
Yeah.
So I think it's it's an important thing that I keep in mind. And
Did anybody here have a female mentor along the way? No? Anybody here have a, did you?
Many,
Chrissy?
many.
Did you?
Many, including Miss Arnold. over
Oh,
there.
thank you so much.
That's
Very
good.
sweet. Thank
All
you.
right. I like that. Anybody here have a mentor that sort of got him into it and kind of helped him? Did you have one?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a number of male mentors, I'd say, who love women, who really love women, and who don't see any sort of gender difference between what we do,
Yeah.
you know? And so I was very lucky that way. I'm
That
sure
is good.
we all probably have found great men that support
I
what we
think,
do.
I think there were men like that, and I mean, I did in the business
Yeah.
who, hired me and promoted me and, took me along, but, and again, were sort of indifferent to if you were,
Yeah.
what you were, but if you were competent and
Right.
you were good at what
Yeah.
you did, they noticed. And, you try not to let that
Right.
get in your way.
They're especially appreciative when you made them look good. They were the best kind
Definitely.
of woman.
Oh, well, they love that. That's right.
I hire that way now.
Right?
Hire those people that make you
Young
look good
men
every
who
day.
make you look good.
Bonnie says, now make me look good.
That's right,
Yeah. So do you think, Annette, I want to ask you, do you think that the business, you've been in this for a while, even though you certainly don't look it, but do you think it's changed, and do you think it is better for women? Do you think it's the same? Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, I don't know if it's changed or not, if it's the same, because probably in Poland it's kind of different than it's here, right? So, for me, the main point about women in film business is the same, and it probably would be the same forever because we are still mothers. And this thing will never change. Being in a film business, which means you work like all the time, you never stop because you are at work or you are just thinking about editing process, you are create things like the whole day long. For me, it's really difficult to do those things good. You know what I mean? Like, I still want to be a mother. I still want to be very involved in her. And at the same time, more often, I feel like I play with my daughter, and at the same time, I think about how to, finish the scene or how to shoot something. And it's so horrible. Now I understand why filmmakers should be men.
Ouch. Well,
I know.
But about I don't ever ask a question about work balance, because I don't think it's possible. I've given up on that. And I'm going to ask you, Rory, you do a lot of things at the same time. So how do you manage that? How do you manage the time? And are you good on social media? Do you just multitask? Do you have helpers? How do you get it all done?
Well, I respectfully disagree with you, but I understand.
Great. I can't on it.
No, I think that it's really important for women to be in this business, and I think that women have proven themselves over and over again as incredibly competent and able, and also beyond that, we've proven ourselves over and over again at the box office, and there
That's right.
are so many. And I actually, this past year, was involved in a series called the Maker Series, which is a series on PBS about women, and it started about the women's rights movement, and then they expanded it to 6 hours on women and the issues or areas that they're focused on today. So I did an hour on women in politics and an hour on women in Hollywood. And, Hollywood is, I'm going to say, Hollywood is sexist. 6% of the directors in the top 250,000 grossing films are women, the directors of those films. So, that's even worse than politics. Politics, women are hovering around 20% in terms of elected officials. So, and you would hope that an industry that sort of prides itself on being both innovative and creative would see the benefits of working with people who don't look exactly like them. But that leap hasn't entirely been made, and I think that the point that's been made by other people on this panel, which is that you gotta show. In order for people to visualize it, we've got to show ourselves doing it.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to be out there. And also, And I would encourage people to read Lean In. I was very resistant to reading it, but then I did read it, and it's a fantastic book because I think it does touch on all of these topics. And one of the things that it says, and proves statistically and in other ways, that women who work in Hollywood and beyond, the children of those women do fantastically well.
That's right.
So I think even though in the day-to-day process it's such a struggle because you feel like you're abandoning your kid or whatever, and I completely understand that, and it's ridden with conflict, that ultimately to be able to come home to talk about what you're doing, to be a role model for your girls and boys, and showing them that women can work, I think is really beneficial actually for them, even though in the immediacy it feels bad.
Agreed. And Carolyn, you probably have the same thing as well.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Rory just said. I don't know if anybody saw, there was a New York Times article yesterday that Sheryl Sandberg actually co-authored called, Madam CEO, can you get me a cup of coffee? And it was actually really interesting because I recognized, my sort of life in that article in many ways, in which basically what it's saying is, women, it's, the sky's not falling horribly. Like, I do feel like we've made huge strides, even in Hollywood, which is incredibly sexist. But, it did really emphasize something that I thought was interesting, which is women often have to work a little bit harder to get the exact same place. And there's a certain amount of expectation that you're going to do what they called like the office housework and not get credit for it. It was this concept of, they had done all these studies, and it's a really short article, you guys can Google it and read it, but essentially what it said was that they did these studies of, at the end of the day, a task comes in, senior female executive, male, senior male executive. If the woman did not volunteer to stay and handle the task,
it wouldn't get done.
She was actually dinged. Whereas the man,
with no expectation he was going to do it anyway.
It was fine.
Right.
If the man didn't do it, there was no repercussions for him. If the woman didn't do it, she was actually discounted down. Like, she got a worse rating in this study. And conversely, it was the,
Who did the study? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, I mean,
Who said?
look at there. But it was sort of an interesting thing where.
But the expectations
there
are.
is, and that did resonate with me, because I do feel like there is this expectation that as women, even if you're a very senior executive female in an organization, there is an expectation that you're going to be sort of more accommodating and more nurturing and sort of get things done if they need to get done. And if you don't do that, I do feel like there's still a little bit of a vibe of, well, maybe she's not as big a team player as we thought.
I don't know, though. 'Cause I think it's one of our best qualities, in a way, that we do that, and we can do 5 things at once.
I think that's true, too.
Yeah.
It's not that I actually, and the truth is, like, I'm that person who, I'm the volunteer. I'm the one who raises my hand all the time.
Yep.
I do get value out of that myself, so I recognize that there's that sort of different balance of it all. But it does still highlight that there is a disconnect somewhere, like, because I see it. I see it in my organization and in the organizations of friends of mine that are working. Like, there is still a little bit of that bias, where women are sort of expected to do some of these other things, and if they don't, they're not going to get as much credit as maybe they should.
Well, I think also what you're touching on is a really important point, which is that the actions that women take are seen through the lens of being engendered, of being women. So, there's all this discussion now about Amy Pascal, and it's about, can women not take this position? Can they not be at this level of being executives? Whereas if a man was in that position and failed, it would just be, this guy failed.
They wouldn't be talking about his gender.
Right.
That's correct.
It would be irrelevant to the discussion.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true. Christina, do you...
I was just going to take the conversation in a slightly different bend.
Of course.
I think that being passionate and hardworking and a perfectionist, like I imagine my colleagues at this table are, I might have been a slightly neurotic, overprotective mom if I didn't have a job to go to and to pour my passion into. Maybe just a little bit.
Thank God.
And I'm actually convinced that me going to work every day and pouring myself into something I loved modeled something for them that will be useful their whole lives, which is
Completely agree.
go do something you care about, go make a difference as much as you can. And I find it hilarious because now I have teenagers, and moms come up to me all the time and say, wow, you have the most mature and self-reliant children ever. How did you do that? And I kind of say, well, don't be home.
That's right, that's good, do it all. Well, you know, along those lines, there was this, a couple years ago, Women in Film and USC commissioned this study at Sundance, speaking of Sundance, right? And they tracked the women that won prizes, you know, all the prizes at Sundance, and the men. And the men after that, they all got different projects, and they all got signed on and went on to bigger things. And the women pretty much fell off the grid. I mean, it was like very few, so they were like, well, what the hell? What the hell happened? You got this big award, everybody loved you at Sundance, and now we haven't heard from you in 3 or 4 years. And the interesting thing about it was it came down to asking for money. That seemed to be the thing that they had to get through, because they're independent filmmakers, and you know how this goes. In order to get your next project, you have to go, you have to make the deal, you have to ask for the money. So I want to ask you guys, and I'm going to ask you, I'm going to start with you, Kristen. Do you find that that is a hard thing? It's hard for anyone to ask for money, and it's good, you can do it for other people, but it seems to be a little tougher to do it for yourself.
Yes, I think so. I've gotten used to it. I started in theater, actually, so we had to beg people to come see the show, and that translated into eventually being comfortable talking about what you're passionate about. And I think I think the key to asking for money is 1,000% believing in what you're asking for money for. If you're doing it for fame, fortune, or prestige, the sell is harder for me. I can't do that. I can only hardcore pitch things that I would throw myself on the track for. And so if I can convey that passion, and that means I have to also accept rejection as a completely normal part of everyday life as an independent producer, it's not a beauty contest. Not everybody's going to love what you love. And so that's what I had to get comfortable with, much more than asking for money. Now I can sit with financiers who are very cynical, and I can throw my heart out there and tell them this. I believe this is a great movie because XYZ. If they don't agree, that's really fine. I know there's about 500, thankfully, other financiers right now out there. And I will go meet with the rest of the 499 of them until we find one that believes and sees the same vision you have. But it's really about loving something with your heart, all of your being. And it doesn't matter if it takes 10 years to get it made, you're going to keep pitching it. You know,
Well, and to Carolyn and Bonnie's point, even internally in an organization, if you're not asking for money, you still got to push that project through. You're selling all the time. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think that, you know, I mean, inside an organization, too, there's also the thing of, like, you know, when women are sort of negotiating for themselves, be it, you know, in their employment contracts, it is a totally different game. I can fight so hard for any member of my team. I do find it very hard to fight hard for myself.
Yeah.
I just do. It's a, you know, I need to get over it.
Yeah. Well,
Or have a good lawyer.
or have a good lawyer. Yeah.
I'm aware. I'm aware that I need to get over
That's
it.
right. You know,
Very cathartic, thank you.
yes. And maybe we don't get over it, but at least we acknowledge it and we know, and then when it's that time to negotiate, get help. Or, you know, I'll help you, and you help me, and Kristen helps Rory, and Rory, everybody helps.
all represent each other.
We had that great conversation on the phone.
Yeah.
We should band together, and when you need to negotiate something, call in me.
Yeah.
When I need to negotiate something, I'll call in one of you.
That's right. I'll make all the difference. But I want to go back for a second to something you said, Kristen, about rejection. Because that is hard. And it reminds me, remember, God, a million years ago, that Sex and the City episode where something is like, it's not about you. I forget exactly what it was now, but that kind of stayed with me. And I tell people when they're looking for jobs, if you don't get it, it's not necessarily about you. It's just whatever. So anybody here, Annetta, did you have to deal with I'm sure you dealt with rejection over and over.
Oh yeah, I mean, in Joanna project, it was the thing was so sudden that I needed to start immediately. So fortunately, Vita Studio didn't reject me, but at the same time, I had to find the cinematographers so quickly, and several my favorite cinematographers said no. And of course, I was a bit sad about that, but the worst thing was that I had to really start immediately, and their no was really bad thing that time. They didn't want to make this movie with me, saying, you know what, I'm not ready for the movie about dying. And when I try to explain them that it's not going to be about that, that it's going to give us strength, they treated me like a little bit crazy, like, you know what, it's impossible. There are several movies about cancer, and it's going to be one of them, the next movie about cancer, and it's no possibility to make a movie about life when she's dying. So yeah, I was really sad about that, but fortunately they didn't agree, and I had Lucas Jal for the project. So my lesson is, and my advice is to not to, you know, be depressed by people who say no. It's probably not the good connection. I rather treat it like this. There were no chemistry, probably. They didn't understand me, but because Lucas understood it right away. I said several, you know, words, and he said, I know exactly what you mean. So it was like that.
That's great.
So sometimes probably there is no good connection. You have to look further. And if you really want something, and if you really believe in it, you just you can't be, you know, depressed by when people say you no. Just find another ones.
Right, just like Kristen said, there's 499 others. To hell with that idiot, right?
They don't get it.
They don't get it. So, so I want to ask you guys about intuition. I happen to think female intuition is one of our best assets. And when I don't rely on it, it's always bad. So, Rory, do you rely on it? How much? Is intuition a big part? Do you get that feeling? And
I think it is. I mean, I think that we've all talked about how you ultimately, for a whole range of reasons, have to really be passionate about a project to make it happen, because
Right.
there is so much rejection and there are so many challenges along the way. And so, you know, when I think the biggest space where I rely on that is deciding which project to pursue, because that's usually going to consume the next, 2 or 3 years of my life, and so it's not always the first one that comes my way, and I have to be able to say no to certain ones, even if they're interesting or funded or, have a lot of the elements that might make it appealing to me, that unless it really speaks to me in a kind of deep and profound way, that I need to kind of follow that.
you got to follow it.
That voice that
Right.
says, wait.
Otherwise, it'll be a long 3, 4, whatever, how many years.
Yeah, exactly.
Carolyn, you go on intuition a lot?
Oh, yeah. I mean, pretty much every day. I actually think it's one of the things that does separate the genders a little bit. Like, I feel like women are very sort of in touch with, sort of that intuitive sense of, call it intuition, call it judgment, call it gut instinct, whatever it might be. But I do feel like women are much more in touch with that, at least in my experience, in my daily life, than men are as a sort of a generalization. But I have to read a room every day.
Yeah, Bonnie, you must, same thing.
And that's something that I find, I use that sort of gut instinct and intuition to do. And the number of times I'll be dealing with, some male colleagues will walk out of a room and they'll say, oh, that went great. And I'll be like, are you crazy? Did you not see that person's face? Did you not see that person's body language? Did you, okay.
Isn't it funny?
That's like their overinflated ego.
Totally.
Or they don't even try to read the room. How about that?
Right, because it's all about, instead of, didn't that go great, what they really mean is, wasn't I great?
Wasn't I great? That was good for me.
Exactly.
That's so funny. It is true.
We know where that translates from.
Christina, you have that too? Do you have you rely on your intuition as well?
I'm sorry, I just love that story. Yeah, when you're working in animation, it is an unbelievable team sport. You are trying to get every person to come on to your show and give you the piece that you need to make your movie that much move forward in any way. And I find where I really rely on my gut is just how to talk to people, how to handle them, how to inspire them to come and give me what we need on the film. And it's actually a joy to allow people real estate on your movie, to feel responsible for giving you something. And it makes the whole team work better when everybody feels like they gave something to this movie, and it's great because all of you put it together. There's hundreds of artists who come together on an animated film, multiple hundreds on a feature. And it's really, I think that's another thing about women is we're happy to share. We don't need to own it. We can, you did this amazing thing, you did this amazing thing.
We all did
Thank
this
you.
amazing thing. Yeah.
But I think also on the creative side, you really rely on that intuition. I mean, you look at those scenes from How to Train Your Dragon and all of these films, really, but there's such subtlety in the eye movement of the dragon and, what you're supposed to feel in that instance and how you communicate that. And it happens with documentary. I mean, it happens, I'm sure, with all of us where, I remember one scene in Last Days in Vietnam where the ambassadors just left and he's in an interview, and in one bite he says exactly what we needed him to say, but in another bite his emotion was so extraordinary, and he said something that's neither here nor there, my other producer really wanted him to say the right thing, and I was like, this emotion is so much truer and more important.
Right, and says so much.
Yeah, and says so much, and it's, and you kind of let it play itself out for an extra 2 or 3 seconds, right. And that emotion comes through, but you have to trust those instincts every time as you're making these films to kind of figure out what feels true and how you're going to communicate that to audiences, and that's such, to me, an essential part of filmmaking.
Right, agree. Rory, was there a particular film that you saw growing up that made you decide you wanted to get into this? Or what was it?
I actually, to tell you the truth, I really didn't think of becoming a filmmaker until I became one. So I wasn't, I was passionate since I was 2. It really wasn't that. I really came to it, I was a women's studies major, as I said, and I wrote my final paper about women and substance abuse and the difficulties that pregnant women had trying to get drug and alcohol treatment. And then I started interviewing these women, and I realized that what they were going through was so in contrast to what I was seeing in the press, which was crack babies having, crack mothers having crack babies, in the sense that they just didn't care. And I met these women, and they all said, we tried to get into treatment programs, and none of them will accept us because we're pregnant. And I was like, well, that's not in any of the articles I'm reading. And so then I thought I should bring these women to Capitol Hill, but of course that didn't seem realistic, so I brought a camera into their living rooms, and I made a film, and then I brought that to Capitol Hill.
Wow. Speaking of I also did women's studies, and I found, came across my final exam, or my topic, and it was, I think I've gone downhill in terms of my intelligence, because I wrote this paper comparing Gertrude Stein to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I'm like, I don't even know, I've forgotten everything. But back then, I think I had it together. I don't know so much about now. But I want to ask you, Bonnie, what film, TV show, what is it? Something had to spark it.
I love movies.
Yeah,
I love my mom grew up during the Depression, and that's what people did. They went to the movies. So when I came along, I was her movie partner. And I love movies, all kinds of movies, from Cinderella to Gone with the Wind to, and watching Cary Grant and Rock Hudson and Doris Day, and I just loved movies. Although when I was growing up, there weren't film schools in every city and every, and so I never imagined myself working in that. I was telling Rory that when I was watching her film, I was growing up during that time in Vietnam, and that stuff that we were watching in her film was on TV every single night. I actually thought I wanted to go into journalism because of that, and but sort of got, when I sort of figured out that you actually could do something in the movie business,
and
get paid. I might, and you get paid for it. I said, really? And
sign me up.
And so through a series of things, I was able to, not until I got out of college actually did I realize that, I went on a movie set and I thought, this is what I want to do, and this is where I want to be, and So I kind of zeroed in on that.
Carolyn, what about you?
I mean, I have a sort of eclectic taste. I love independent film, I love television, all kinds, even reality television. I know it's blasphemy, but I get a lot of enjoyment out of that.
I think it was those long flights.
Honestly, I find it all entertaining, just different levels. But I mean, I think the first film I ever really remember watching as a kid that sort of, really affected me was To Kill a Mockingbird. And it was, I mean, well, my dog's name's Scout, Atticus, and Boo Radley, so I mean, maybe it had an impact on me.
I think so.
But, it wasn't that I ever thought I was going to, it wasn't like an inspiration, oh, no, I'm going to get into the film business because of it. I kind of stumbled into the film business by just sort of living in Los Angeles after I'd moved from New York. And, but, I just got back from Sundance where I saw probably 5 films a day over the course of, 5 days. And even films that maybe sort of, I'm not dying to go watch again, I just loved the experience. I had a really, really, really good time just watching all of these different kinds of movies that were, where people's real passion is poured into these. And I appreciated all of them for, all the individual things that they had about them. I enjoy it.
What about you, Kristen? What was your To Kill a Mockingbird?
Mine was, I was raised by a single mom, working mom, who I saw do it all. And she and I, the one thing we would do to kind of, chill out on weekends was watch movies together. I'd say the one that was like the absolute moment, turning point for me was watching Terms of Endearment with her.
Yeah.
And her mother, my grandmother is very eccentric / bipolar, and so we called it eccentric until I saw that movie, and then that opened up a conversation about my mom's childhood because my mom wept through most of the film, and it was such a cathartic thing. And then we talked about her life for hours, and I don't think we would have if we hadn't seen that film together. So I think that for me, I wanted to be a part of storytelling at that moment, and I didn't have any clue what the jobs were called, but I just basically was like, I'm going to Los Angeles when I graduate from high school.
And that's why the films that you gravitate toward open those doors, communication. Annetta?
Mostly I grew up on European movies and European directors, so my first very emotional experience was with Kieślowski's movies and also Ingmar Bergman's movies. I grew up on Mike Leigh movies as well, so it was kind of psychological movies. And I think since I remember, since I was a kid, I think I did movies. I didn't call it like that time, but now I know that making movies is something more than just the activity of making movies, because it's kind of the way of you see the world, you perceive people, you see the relationship between people. So when I think of my younger years, I did it from the very beginning. I was spying people, following them to their homes, looking to their windows, and thinking what they were.
You have a stalker thing going. Do you know what that word is? That stalker? We'll talk to you about that after, but you showed up at her house and you're spying on the window. But you get the film made, so.
And I remember one lady, she just stopped and asked, little girl, why are you walking just after me for such a long time? So I was, imagining how she lives, and her husband, her kids, and, the way she lives. So it's kind of, I think, feeling people and words, so yeah.
But you knew early.
Yeah.
Christina, did you know? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was a voracious reader and story consumer since being a very small child. I would, any way there was a story, comic books, TV shows, movies, I was completely enamored by. I remember being incredibly blown away seeing Mary Poppins as a child. And at the time, I interpreted it as a call to maybe get involved in visual effects, because I'm still to this day blown away by how she opens that carpet bag and pulls out like a 6-foot rubber plant.
That was pretty cool.
Although I look back now with the fullness of time and realize that what it was really telling me was, you want to be the person that swoops in with the umbrella, solves the family's problems, and then floats off with the clouds. And that's not really how our jobs work, but it's kind of nice to think that's how it
It is
happens.
kind of nice to think about
Have a
that.
beautiful film at the end.
Well, I don't know, you sort of, I think you might be onto something, I think you might. So I just want to take a minute and thank everybody so much for your time and your openness and your commitment. And most of all, I want to thank the audience. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being so supportive, and thank you. Yeah, we got through them all.